All right. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting sounding records from your home studio or your jam space. Today we are live here from the Studioszene event in Hamburg, which is really fun, a really cool event. And we're here with Warren Huart, live broadcasting today, this podcast. How are you, Warren?
I'm great. I was just saying, I've been to Hamburg, I think 3 times. The problem is when I came here in a band, I would pull up in a van at like 8 o'clock at night, offload my equipment, play a show, get back in the van and drive away. So this is the most amount of time I've ever spent in Hamburg in daylight in my life. It's beautiful.
Exactly what I did last time.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like I'm actually here in daylight. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Really good to have you. And also, as always, I'm here with my co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. So my name is Benedict Hein. This is Malcolm. Glad that you're joining me over here. You flew over here from Canada, so really excited that we get to do this together. And so and Warren, we did actually an interview not too long ago, right?
Just a few weeks ago.
It was. And we actually brought some follow-up questions, and we hope that the audience here today also has some questions that we can get to later.
I've been enjoying this, and are we live, by the way?
We are. We are streaming to, I think, the Studioszene or sound and recording YouTube channel, their Twitch, their Facebook,
Excellent.
Our YouTube channel. It's like 4 or 5 different locations at least. So
this is great. It's a wonderful turnout. It's busy. There's lots of great companies here. I'm very happy. So come if you're thinking about coming, come and visit us. We're going to be here all 3 days. So come and visit us tomorrow. I'll be walking around the floor talking to people, and of course Thursday's the last day. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So talking about a lot of cool companies and gear here and everything. Did you find something already that you get excited about, like any new piece of gear that you checked out?
Yes. Obviously, it's only been open a couple of hours, but we did go and talk to Marek at Dangerous for a bit. He was actually talking about, what is the name of those speakers? Ex Machina?
I don't know how to pronounce them, but I think you're right.
I think so.
Machina, I don't know.
Machina. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll find out. He is waxing lyrically about them, so we're going to go and give them a listen to. Yeah. Obviously, we're talking about all the Dangerous stuff. Our friend Michael Michael Krush from Tegela has a booth there. Awesome Elysia, we really love because that's Ruben's company, who is the original designer of Transient Designer, SPL.
Yeah.
So that's all we've done so far. Just talk to the 3 companies, all people we love that have great products.
Awesome. Really cool. Yeah, awesome. That sounds great. And those speakers were on our agenda as well. We heard a lot of people talk, rave about them. So yeah.
I assume they're German if it's Machina.
I don't even know, to be honest. But
nobody knows? Anybody know?
That's on the homework list.
Yeah, exactly. So Warren, I got one question that I totally didn't ask on our last interview. And so this was, most people, or many people know you because you produce like a pro and the online stuff you do, but also from your credits, obviously, as a producer. But you got to the US with your band originally, right?
Yeah.
When you and then to check a record, and you kind of relocated the band, basically. And how did you end up, becoming a producer from being a musician, and then an educator from being a producer? Just a little bit of this backstory, just because a lot of people in our audience, they are musicians, and some of them want to be producers, and how you ended up becoming a producer after being a musician.
Well, it sort of actually was always in tandem.
Okay.
Because when I was a little kid, I was 15 when I first started playing guitar, and what I would do is I would take a tape cassette. My dad had a little Philips. Anybody remember cassette players? Dating myself. The Philips one that was like the classic one, and then he had a Sony Hi-Fi. So what I would do is I would record on the little Philips, play like a da 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 kind of really bad kind of pentatonic run really badly on my guitar, then take that out, put it in the 70s Hi-Fi, my dad's old 70s Hi-Fi, press play, and then do an overdub back onto the other cassette player. So I was already, right from the get-go of learning to play the first stuff, recording. So while I was in bands, I was still engineering those.
Oh, yeah.
And I had, like probably many people here, I worked in music stores. So I worked in 2. One of them is very famous. You all know Anderton's. Mm-hmm. I worked at Anderton's. Lee Anderton's actually a very old friend of mine. So I worked there, but I also worked in a much more local store Anderson's was close to me, but there was another one called Kingfisher Music, and I was there. So what I would do is I'd sell PA and recording equipment. And I also worked part-time at a recording studio that my friends had. So I was like doing everything. I was playing in club bands, going out, doing covers, writing songs. I was teaching guitar. I was just kind of a bit of everything. So I feel like, I've said this many times before, but I don't mind repeating it. I feel like my journey to become a producer, an engineer, and a mixer, and become successful on it is basically what everybody has to do now.
Yeah.
There's no like, you're an engineer and you're making, 6 figures a year, engineering massive records. Yeah. It doesn't happen like that anymore. Even I can name many, many famous engineers that are doing independent records at the same time as doing the occasional major label one. They're also educating, they're also designing gear, designing plugins. It's what I do is what all of you have to do now, which is like be little social media mavens and get yourself out there and get people find you so you can record. It's just the business, it's what we do. So I felt like it was a really good opportunity to launch Produce Like a Pro, because my way of coming up is the modern way, even though it happened 15, 20 years before kind of the revolution in the internet. It still was exactly the way stuff. I'm lucky I have a lot of friends that work in music, but the strange thing is it was just the area I grew up in, because it had 2 incredible music stores. It bred a lot of that in the area. Everybody wanted to do music. I'd go to a music store, Kingfisher. Yeah. I worked there on the weekends when I was 16, I think. And I went in there and they had John Deacon came in, the bass player from Queen, with his son when I was a little kid. Comes in and I said to John Deacon's son,
which is your favorite band, right?
My favorite band. And I said to John Deacon's son, I was like, "Do you want to be a bass player when you grow up?" And he's like, "No, I want to be a drummer." So I don't know. Those are the kinds of experiences. But to me, it's like it's a blending of everything.
Yeah. All right, really cool. Like, why do all kids want to be drummers anyway? Like, my kids want to be drummers, and lots of my friends too. So I don't know why is that?
Well, it's gonna sound terribly masculine to say this. So please forgive me for not being PC. But I remember all the girls liked the drummers best.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
maybe it's the physical thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be the reason. Yeah, good.
That's such a masculine thing to say, so please, I apologize, but I do remember, I think lots of guys were like, I'm going to be the drummer because it's masculine, and like, I was all sort of bookish, and I just wanted to be the guitar player that was playing with pedals, and
which you ended up being doing.
Yeah,
cool.
I still think, I think being engineering, guitar play, because like with guitar players, some of the greatest guitar players, I know I'm going on a tangent, I'm famous for it, but when you think of like Jeff Beck and Danny Gatton, who these like, especially Danny Gatton, anybody know who that is? He was this really technical kind of Telecaster player. They used to call him the master of the Telecaster, incredibly technical thing. Him and Jeff Beck and a number of other great guitar players are all really good, they're all dead now unfortunately, all were really good mechanics. They used to love like pulling engines apart and rebuilding stuff and everything. Is it sort of that technical nerdy brain? That sort of makes sense. And as I'm sure you all know, music is great for people that suffer from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and stuff, because it hits the same part of your brain as mathematics. So it keeps your brain really, really, So I think a lot of us are kind of, we love that stuff because we're like tinkering. We like opening up stuff, piece of equipment, and like messing around. And,
totally.
So I want to circle back to
please,
a deeper part of that question, though, because you went over there, and if our research was correct, to cut a record with your band.
That's right. Yeah.
And did you intend to stay there? Because that became home, correct?
Well, I think there was first of all, it was just out of necessity at first, because we went over there. We had done recordings in the UK, which had done fairly well. We'd had a couple of songs in the charts. So, and we were kind of a bubbling under. The Enemy had featured us a few times. We'd got a front cover, not like the full front cover, but we'd been on the front cover, little photo, a little blurb about us. So, we were in that sort of place. We were doing all the hip places like Water Rats. Right. For anybody who knows the UK kind of market, played some shows with Lloyd Cole. We did one with Lloyd Cole and the Commotions when they got back together. It was all like this. It was a nice buzz. So when we went to America, the idea was to do the album out there to just sound a little bit more American, because we had an American girl singer and we were an indie band, and it was a bigger market. Let's be honest, the American market is, I think, 42% of everything in music.
Oh,
you
wow.
know.
Okay.
So you add all the rest of Europe together,
Yeah.
we're only 58%. They're like such a huge part of the music industry. So we went over there. We did the album and we'd had a list of different people. So what our publisher did, the publisher paid for us to go to anyone we wanted to make the record, and then they sold the record to a record label. And so we went over there, and that was a guy called Jeremy Lascelles. I don't suppose anybody will know who that is in Deutschland, but just not necessarily a mogul, but a very, very smart guy. Anyway, he had signed Portishead and XTC and all these kind of bands, so very, very great taste. So we were very excited. We went over there. We chose the guy we wanted, and it was Don Smith. Now, Don Smith had done... I suppose he was famous for doing Tom Petty's big 80s stuff. Okay. Like he had done Last Dance with Mary Jane and all that kind of stuff. And he was a world-class engineer. Don was his right-hand man, so he had done Rolling Stones records. He'd done the Keith Richards solo records, all these great records. But the thing that got me excited as the geek was he had done that campervan Beethoven, Cracker, and he'd done that record Kerosene Hat, which had a massive hit in the mid-90s with the song "I Feel So Low." I feel like it was a great song, and it sounded fantastic. But what got me interested was I was reading, I don't remember what magazine it was, Sound on Sound or something like that. I was reading the magazine, and I'd read that he had shown up with a 24-track, a mini Neve console, and they had set up a studio in a barn, and just sort of made the record totally punk rock in the mid-90s when that was not what people did.
Not a thing.
Now is what everybody does. Yeah. And I remember just thinking, that's my guy. That's the guy I want to make a record with. A guy like us, somebody just sets up and runs some cables and starts making a record. And everybody else was was just as cool and had great credits. But I remember thinking, that's the reason why I want to work with him, because I know he's going to be somebody I'm going to learn from. Yeah. So we went and we made the record in Los Angeles at his house, and he had built a recording studio. Actually in a double car or 4-car garage underneath a tennis court in his garden. So, all very posh.
Life is good.
Life is good. Yeah, I mean, he was massively successful. Yeah. But it was an amazing experience, and he was. I remember silly little things. He had a little Neve sidecar, so everything went through the Neve sidecar, and he had a Fairchild, a 670. And one channel had Mick written on it, and the other channel had Keith written on it.
Really? Wow.
And he once he'd recorded the Stones like that, he never took that tape off. I don't think any of us would.
No, and it's probably $200,000 at this point.
Yeah. And whoever owns it now has probably still got Mick and Keith.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I have a photo of that somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. Speaking about having to do everything yourself or learning so many things yourself today, you've just released a book. We've talked about it on the other podcast too.
Yes. Yeah.
The Home Studio Recording is the title of the book, and you were telling me that you're working already on more books, and one was on mastering. I think you said
mastering and mixing.
Yeah. And so there's a 2-part question there. The first part is do you get to do a lot of mastering too, or did you do a lot of mastering in the past? And the second part is how do you even feel about that, mastering your own music or music you've mixed versus hiring mastering engineers? What's your take on that? Is that also something you should have in your tool belt today, or? Mastering's
a very interesting discussion, and we could sit back here.
Okay.
It's
all right.
The best mastering engineers I work with don't often get to work with kind of homemade stuff not as much as so quite often when I've recorded and mixed records, or I've worked with an external mixer, I'll go to the mastering session and they don't do anything. They don't need to do much.
Yeah, the mix is right.
When we did for instance, when we did the second Frey record, I flew out to hang out with Bob Ludwig, who mastered it, and most of the record had been mixed by Michael Brower. And a couple of the singles were mixed by Mark Endert, who is absolutely phenomenal. It's Mark Endert. And we had to turn Mark Endert's mixes down because he couldn't get Michael Brower's mixes as powerful and as loud as Mark Endert's. And that was his only job.
Yeah.
He didn't add any EQ or compression or limiting. He just kind of rebalanced the mixes a little bit. He limited a little bit on Michael's to try and get them up to the same level as Mark's. But essentially, His job was to take Mark Endert's, didn't do any EQ compression limiting at all on Mark's at all, and just brought them down like a dB, and because that was the only way to kind of match the level. And sometimes that is the job of an amazing mastering engineer, is just that last thing.
But that's a skill in and of itself, right? Knowing when not
it's
to do
definitely a skill in itself, but I think that's the reason. I think because the reason why I'm going to that direction to answer your question is I think for a lot of home recordists, mastering is a different thing.
Yeah.
It's for a lot of you out there that are still learning this craft, mastering for you is probably the last part of the mixing, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's not that.
I agree.
It's not a final, absolutely amazing mix that a mastering engineer goes, you know what, I just need to turn this down a dB and we're done.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
So it's a very difficult question because, you know, there's so much confusing information out there. That's the understatement of the decade. You know, it's really confusing.
So how are you approaching to solve that in your book for people, for example? Like, what's your take on the, like?
Well, I mean, I agree with the standard hypothesis, which is basically mix your song as best as you can, make it sound like it should be on the radio, and then think about mastering later and make it a later thing that you do. Yeah. Put it to another. You know, I'll come back to that in a few days' time when my ears are clean, or at least the next day or something.
Yeah.
That is a very smart way of doing it. If it's there specifically to solve a problem and you've got problems, open up your mix and solve the problem.
Yeah.
Don't use mastering as a kind of... It's a tough one because mastering is a very, very confusing, underrated and overrated at the same time process. You know, because people underrate what it can do, but then overrate it as though it's some kind of thing that's going to solve everything. You know, really, like I said, if you've mixed it really, really well, you shouldn't need to do much in mastering. Most of the time with these top guys, what they're doing, guys and girls, and to be honest, in this business, I think of the top 6 mastering engineers, I think 3 of them were women now.
Yes.
So, which is a really good part of our industry. You know, you think Kim Rosen, Piper Payne, and of course Emily Lazar is probably the most famous mastering engineer in the world. So I think, you know, people would say to me sometimes, like, you know, I bring that up often. I'm like, you know, there's no real war going on now between men and women because women have already won when it comes to mastering. So there you go.
True. Yeah.
But but anyway, try to solve your stuff in your mix. Don't think about mastering when it comes to mixing. Don't even worry about it. Just mix the songs the best you can.
Yeah. Do you mix into a mastering chain or like just a mix bus, basically a simple one?
I do a very simple mix bus. First of all, growing up in analog, and then I'm at that, you know, being a Gen Xer, I'm at the crossroads. So I grew up at a time when I was a teenager, things were only predominantly done on tape. As I got into my early 20s, it was the full crossover. Everything was crossing over. So what we would do is we would record on tape and then dump into Pro Tools to edit. But we hated late 90s, early 2000s. People were too nervous to commit only to Pro Tools. People did, but the difference was in a DAW, it was very obvious. You heard those records and they were super brash, super bright. The high end was like sizzly and it just didn't sound that good. And I mean, you know, there was genres that probably benefited from it, especially modern metal. They probably really liked that ultra bright, aggressive kind of stuff. But at the time, people were nervous. I remember when I was working with Dave Sardi and we did like The Thrills and Hot Heat, and Jet and stuff like that, we were still tracking everything on tape. But then, and that was 2005, 6, you know, there was still that crossover. It wasn't really that long ago if you think about it. But as things have sort of progressed now, you can stay entirely in the box. You can keep everything fully digital. You need to be solving everything at a mix stage. So by the time you get to answer your question directly, get to the mix bus, you don't have to do very much. Yeah. If you're doing a schnizzle ton of compression, EQ, and everything on your mix bus, find out why. Why are you doing that? What's going on? Solve the problem earlier on in the chain. And it's really just not the way to be working. And there's a lot of confusion. There's the two things that have sort of become my mission when it comes to like trying to combat the misinformation and stuff out there. Is people always say to me, well, you know, what about this reverse mixing thing that blah, blah, blah teaches? And I'm like, it doesn't work because it works for the person that has created the master bus based on how they mix into it. They have a template where they have individual EQ on the individual sources. Then in that template, they also have a bus where they're bussing their drums, and maybe they have 2 or 3 buses, which have like a clean, a parallel, then a combined bus. All of this stuff is being done, this template. So by the time it gets to the mastering bus, they can have fixed amount of compression, EQ, and limiting. Maybe they've got ozone on it, maybe all this kind of stuff. But unless you have figured out their template going up to that stage, don't even think about it. Now, it might be after a year or 2 of you mixing, you know, using that, you'll get your own template, and you will have a master bus that does all those things, which is totally cool. But don't adopt somebody's master bus and think that's going to solve your way of mixing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I always see it when people ask online about how to implement, for example, the Brauerizing or things like that, and they, you know, they don't fully understand how he does it, and then wonder why it doesn't work for them, and like, you know, these types of things.
It's such a unique sound. I mean, the Brauerizing thing is, I get it. I get the principle of it, but you know, it was going through so much. When I've worked with him, I did 3 or 4 albums with him. So much parallel stuff.
And it's been developed for like over decades to the point where
it's developed, but it's also a little bit haphazard, because what it was is a ton of very, very old, you know, equipment that probably was creating all kinds of different phase relationships. Do you want to adopt that kind of way of working? I think it's so unique to him, and it creates and also, you know, I listened to a lot of those records that it was big on, like the Coldplay stuff, and I don't know if it sold any more records. I think people bought Yellow because they wanted Yellow, you know? It's weird. You go back and listen. I listened to Yellow the other day. We were driving, and it came on the radio, and it's like that. I mean, that guitar is like literally a quarter tone out of tune, quarter step out of tune, and it just, the bend never quite hits the note and everything. I mean, it wouldn't even pass the taste test now. No radio station would play that song anymore. But at the time, it was like, yeah, that's cool, you know. So it's,
I know what you mean. Yeah. Totally.
So you know, everything in context.
Yeah, exactly.
I think people now are looking for mix. They're looking for you all out there to be able to do everything, which means you need to learn how to mix classic rock, you know, modern hip hop, you know, you name it, whatever it might be, everything in between, country, folk. You need to have all of those things under your fingertips, because if you want to make a living at this, the person that's going to walk through your door or email you a track to mix just wants you as a mixer. Now, it might be that one of you out here is a very specialized in modern metal. That's great. But I think we can name all those people in maybe one or two hands, the people that only work in that genre. But I'm telling you, there is a lot of people that we know inside the Produce Like a Pro Academy that make a living, that have a proper middle-class living doing music that you've never heard of. So it is possible to make enough money to buy a house and be relatively successful, like you would as some other professional thing. You don't have to be a household name, but you are what I would call, and what I did most of my career, a jobbing professional. I don't know what that works in Deutsch, but you know, it's a person that we would, even while we were still doing started the channel, I would get up in the morning, I would film from 9 to 11 doing a video for the channel. Then at 11 I might be recalling a mix or mixing a song. And then I, would scoff down some lunch, and then I'd be doing guitar or keyboard overdubs on another piece of production. And then in the evening, a singer would come in and sing, and maybe we'd start the mix off after we comp the vocal. And so we'd be doing 3 to 4 different productions a day. And of course, there'd be a voiceover and maybe a rap. You know, that's what you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I would master a song for somebody else, or mix a different genre. I had a German band fly in, and we had to recut the vocals. The singer came in, the vocals weren't very well recorded for whatever reason, so we recut the vocals. So you're mixing and you're recutting vocals. Yeah. My point is, like, that's a jobbing professional.
Yeah, working.
And that's what everybody I know does.
I mean, we're good examples of that. I've been a full-time mixing engineer for more than 10 years now, and I was a producer, then transitioned to mixing only. And some of the records I worked on did pretty well, but I never had a #1 or any like really big records that that the masses know about. But I've been able to provide for my family, make a good income, and that's my job. That's my thing. So it is entirily possible, like you said.
It is entirely possible. Yeah.
And even if you specialize, it's possible. But I think you should do that later on. Like, I've been doing everything I could potentially do for like 5, 6, 7 years, and then eventually transition into like more specialized stuff. But in the beginning, I was in total yes mode and did everything basically. So,
yeah. I still think that's for most people. I remember I think Andrew Sheps was talking about this about 4 or 5 years ago. He's got busier now, but at that point he said that he was doing 2 or 3 records a year because he was only probably working on huge albums.
Yeah.
And I think that is the reality. You know, if you're a rock producer, engineer, or mixer, how many records a year are there for you? But if you're somebody that's working in multiple genres, like he must be now because his credits, like he's super, super busy, but he's probably mixing something a little bit more pop or a little bit more heavy, a little bit more folk, a little bit more that. So, you know, that's diversity in music.
Yeah.
Just do it, you know. And if you're doing voiceover, who cares? You're still getting paid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Malcolm, you had a question about. Go ahead.
Well, this kind of pertains to going back to the mastering question you had, and I think it's the point you're proving is that understanding mixing helps you understand what mastering is, and understanding tracking helps you understand what mixing is. So if you want to become a good, just hard metal mixer, you still have to learn how to engineer everything else and develop all those skills in tandem.
Agreed. Every time I've mastered where I've been given stuff to master, I just kind of, not every time, but often I'm just thinking, God, I wish I could just open up the mix and make this. Because I'm sitting there, you know, maybe there's some low-end issues, but they're pertaining to certain sections of the song. So like the chorus doesn't have enough low-end, or part of the chorus doesn't have enough low-end. So what are you doing? You're automating on mastering, trying to get it, but all you're doing is sort of applying a blanket approach to something that could be so easily solved if you could just get to the bass guitar and make the low end more even, you know.
And the same could be said if you were mixing and you're like, oh man, if they had just, you know,
recorded it differently, or better.
It's always working that way, and I think that like really proves your point of why you need to try everything.
Well, I think our job is, this is my personal opinion, there's a phrase in England, jobs worth. You know, people, I don't know what the German version of it is, where people like, you know, like I was only hired to do this. You know, that kind of like jobs worth mentality. It's more than my job's worth. You can't be in music and do that. So for a tangent for a second, not very often, but every now and then somebody will put a comment up like, how do you find better clients? And I'm just like, the question is the problem. The fact that you've asked that question is the problem. You can't think that way. You just got to do the job. So often, Ace won't mind me telling you this, but I did 3 albums with Ace Frehley that I co-produced. You know, they'd bring me the tracks, and we'd end up having to recut stuff. And often when he sent me something just to mix, there would be like no stereo guitar in the chorus because he's got so many ideas. So he would put down like a really cool lead part on the left channel, and then he'd do a strumming part on the right. And it was like, well, where's the balance? Right. And so I would either go to the second chorus and pull in the rhythm part and put it on the first. But often I was like, there needs to be some breaks in there. I just need a clang, just to lift the chorus. So I'd plug in a guitar and do it.
Right.
And he would listen back to it and know that those weren't his rhythm guitars, but he did not give a crap. All he wants is the record to sound great. Yeah. And that is our job. Absolutely. I tell this story, maybe I shouldn't because it's going live, I'll blur. But there's a friend of mine, I won't say who the singer is, but he is like an MD for a very, very famous singer. And he was asked to do a track for a movie, and they recorded it and produced it, and he played on it. He's a wonderful musician. Got everything up, and then the singer said to him, you know, would you mix it? So he mixes it, and the singer said, do not auto-tune my vocal. Whatever you do, do not tune my vocal. I don't want anybody to tune. I work with this other guy, and he never tunes it, but he always makes me sound great. So he said, well, what does he do? He said, well, he uses this special combination of delays and reverbs that makes me sound perfectly in tune. So, of course, he mixes it. He references the other person's tracks. He does his best, sends it to the singer. I'm not going to tell you gender, because as soon as I tell you gender, you'll start guessing who it is. Sends it to the singer, and the singer says, my vocals don't sound right. You haven't got the right blend of delays and reverbs. So he's like, so they get sent another reference track. So he sits there and he matches the reverbs and delays and makes it sound exactly the same. Sends it back. No, you still haven't got it. Just said, you know what? You did a wonderful job on the production and the recording and everything. I'm just going to have this other mixer mix it. We all know the answer is what happened, didn't it? The other mixer tunes the vocals, just doesn't tell the singer.
Gets the job done. Yeah.
And that's what we have to do. So it's just a reality. I don't want to have a 5-hour discussion about auto-tune or anything like that. But the point is that your job is to make it sound amazing.
Yes.
So sometimes somebody sends you, and not to lecture the Because that was the question. That's why when that person asked that question, I'm like, you've got to change your thinking.
Yeah. Right.
Because if an artist comes into my studio to record, for instance, let alone mix or whatever, and the drummer's not that great, it's not my job to get there and destroy the drummer and make them feel like that they're worthless or whatever. You know, I've been in situations as an engineer where I've seen producers do that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and
totally.
it doesn't benefit anybody. You're there, yes, you want them to be better, but you've got to get in there and encourage it. It's like when people ask me about vocal production, they're like, how do you get a great vocal when the vocalist is not singing very well? I'll just say, well, where did it sound good? On the second verse, was there a line where maybe they got breathy and it got lots of personality? Talk about that. Be like, hey, you know that second line you did there where you went, that sounded great, we should do more of that. Mm-hmm. That's how you get a good vocal performance. Or you can be the dude that's all like, you know, bro, you sucked. It doesn't do anything.
Won't get you far. No,
it doesn't get you very far at all.
No.
But that's our job.
Yes.
Our job is to empower people.
Yes.
The best compliment I've ever got is when you work with an artist, you help them understand what good songwriting is, what great arrangement is, and all that kind of stuff, and then they come back to you next year to make the next record, and their songs are better, and their arrangements are better, and their performances are better because you help them do that.
Yes, totally. So, Warren, thank you again for doing this with us, for the time you spent here. We're already at the end of our podcast slot here, unfortunately. But I also want to thank Mark and like the guys at Sound and Recording in Studio Sofa for letting us use this cool sofa here and do the podcast here. It's so amazing. So, do we have time for a little Q&A, Mark? Is that right? Okay, so we can go a little longer. Do you have time too, Warren?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Perfect.
We're at Mark's the boss, so whatever he says. If he says I have time, then we have time.
Awesome. So if any of you here have questions for Warren, please, there's a mic that Mark has in his hands, and please grab it and ask. And if anyone prefers to ask in German, I'm happy to translate. So
I'll try and understand it.
Ja, so kurz auf Deutsch. Wenn jemand auf Deutsch lieber eine Frage stellen möchte, dann kann ich das gerne übersetzen. Und genau, wenn irgendjemand jetzt eine Frage an Warren stellen möchte, da ist das Mikrofon.
If you said that slowly, I probably would have understood.
Really?
I got bits of it.
Hi, my name is Robert Kleiner, and
Hi
I
there.
got a question. I got a two-part question for you.
Okay.
There's a certain charm about old analog consoles.
Sure.
So, being a hobbyist on a budget, I'm not able to pay for a lot of servicing and maintenance for a console.
Sure.
So, would you say that I should scrap the idea altogether of having a console in my setup because of budget reasons?
Well, I suppose I have to ask you, what is your budget? If you were to buy an analog console, what would it be?
Well, you see a lot of old analog consoles on the internet for like 500 clicks, you know?
Yeah.
But if you buy that and you have to service that for like, say, 5,000 a year, you know, that would...
It wouldn't be that much. To be honest, I'm plugging the book now. You brought the book.
Yeah.
In my book, I talk about that a lot. That's one of the things. I agree with you. There's something... Isn't it interesting, like every single, guy, I'm going to say guy because there's always a dude that started a YouTube channel that says they mix entirely in the box and are trying to, look, how come every single time they take a photo, they're sitting in front of a console? You ever notice that? Yeah, you don't need it. Hand on a fader and all this kind of stuff. There is something lovely about a console. And I really, and when you walk into a recording studio and you see even a small 16-channel kind of console. Look, here's the bottom line. When I did a lot of the first Frey record, when we tracked the drums on How to Save a Life, I used a TAC Scorpion. It cost $750. And I think it was 24 channels. So I think one of the channels didn't work at all, and another one, the EQ, just don't engage, don't use the EQ. I never bothered repairing it, because I still had 22 channels that worked absolutely fine. And yeah, maybe it would have cost, I don't think it would have cost more than €200, dollars, whatever, to repair it. I don't see anything costing $5,000 to fix in that kind of realm. I think it's a really easy way to get into a console, to look at like an old AMEC. The TAC Scorpion sounded great. And when I did the first record I did with Dave Sardi, he was in a band. He had his band called Bark Market, which Rick Rubin had fallen in love with, so hired him, and that's what made him successful. And he became Dave Sardi that you know now. He did all the Bark Market records on a TAC Scorpion. So when I said to him, "Oh, I've got a TAC Scorpion, that's how I make records," he's like, "Ah, great! All these records that Rick Rubin thinks sound amazing, all done on a console that probably cost him $1,000 used." I think it's a quick, easy way to get into it. I think Allen and Heath 80s consoles, Soundtrax 80s consoles, Soundcraft 80s consoles, and then to be honest, you can get things like an AMEC now, super. I saw an Einstein for sale a few weeks ago for like $3,000.
Yeah.
That was a £65,000 console when it was new. It's an interesting one. Like when I first moved to the States, quad consoles were like nothing. Now they got trendy. People used to always say, "Oh, don't buy anything with an op amp." When I was a kid, but of course APIs have op amps. Yeah. So what does that mean? You know what I mean? It's like there's always the criteria, based on. And look, when I bought my first 1073, it was a BAE one, a Brent Averill one. I think it was $1,100 something. Now you can't get into something like that for less than like $4,000 when it's like either a high quality clone like a BAE or an original. You can buy the cheaper versions, but my point is like, what's trendy or whatever is an interesting kind of nebulous thing that kind of moves around. I think getting a €1,000 console is a smart way of getting into a lot of mic pre's really cheaply that have insert points and stuff like that. How else are you going to do it? I mean, there's some great gear here for sale, but if you go and buy 24 channels of any one of these mic pre's you see around here, which is great if you can afford it, but might as well buy a used console, you know what I mean? Most people are buying one channel of a high quality mic pre to do vocals and to do guitar overdubs and do bass and piano. My point is like you could buy a pair of something nice and then have a console for tracking drums in your garage and get that for the same price as buying one mic pre from it. Still buy the nice mic pre for all the overdubs, don't get me wrong, but it's really a smart idea to go out and buy like a used TAC Scorpion for $750. You know what I mean? And if two channels don't work, who cares? Why bother even repairing them? You know what I mean? You're still going to have 22 that work. And you're going to have a nice, cheap, easy way of getting into some really good, quite interesting sounding mic pre's.
Well, thank you. And my second part of the question is, I got the book here. Would you sign it for me?
Of course.
Great. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Lucas.
Hi, Lucas.
Hello.
Big fan of your work and
Thank
your
you.
Your attitude as well.
Thank you.
And I had a question regarding polishing turds, proverbial turds, because I noticed that when I started mixing, and I was looking into a lot of courses online, mix with the masters, this and that. The material itself is way better than anything I would have gotten when I started out. So. And I feel that I've gained a lot of experience by having to fix things that I've never ever seen anyone on YouTube talk about. So
I'm with you. I've talked about this before, maybe you've heard me say it, but the first time I ever got into a quote-unquote proper studio as an engineer, I was bewildered. I come into a studio, I'd already had my own recording studios, from 4-track to ADATs was like the first proper thing I had. I had one ADAT and a Soundtrax Topaz. Everybody remember the Topaz? That grey, ugly console?
Yep.
Or like the kind of, what do they call that thing? Pastel, kind of pink and yellow and green. And so I had that. That was how I started. Like, that was when I was making my first proper records. I got bands signed. I even got recordings done on ADATs with that Topaz. And I had, can't remember the name of the compressor. It was like one of those ones you could get from like Guitar Center from like entry level in like the late 90s. But anyway, my point is like by the time I finally got into a recording studio and I was the engineer / producer and I had an assistant, I was bewildered by the assistant, and I realized they couldn't do anything I could do at 1/10 the speed I could do it. And I'm like, what's going on here? They're working on major label records. I was like, okay, that's the point. All they do is spend all day with the world's greatest drummer recording, throwing up some mics, generically speaking, and that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, and some people started like that. So this assistant I was working with, who's a lovely guy, he's never had to do the kind of stuff that you and I are talking about. I've had drummers that couldn't play a beat, literally, so I've got like 25 takes of drums, and I'm sitting there and I am, deciding what, oh, this bar works here, I'm going to fly it over there. That fill works here, I'm going to fly it over there. They completely changed the groove in the second verse, but it's not right. I much prefer the way the second half of the blah, blah, blah. Point is, I've just built it all up from scratch while still trying to maintain a feel and not make it just feel like it's just do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da. So like and that's how you learn. So by the time I got to make records, it was so easy because I had worked with all of what you're describing as the turds, and I've done lots of polishing. To be honest, I own it, and I love it. People say to me when I'm editing, they're like, "You're so fast." I'm like, I am not working quickly. This is just how I work, and it's because of what you're talking about. So I would embrace it, honestly embrace it. And it's tough. Yes, you do watch those kind of like high level, I'm a famous mixer guy, go, yeah, man, I just put a little, look, see, 10K, you hear that? You hear that? You're like, I get it. I get a little frustrated by that, but that's another reason why I started Produce Like a Pro, because when I started, there was Mix with the Masters, there was Pensado's Pace, there was Graham with Recording Revolution, and I didn't feel like there was anything in the middle. I felt that there was Graham, which was very much beginners, and then there was this sort of, I suppose, I hate this word, but people use it, as sort of an elite way of doing it. I'm like, well, where's the bit in the middle where the rest of us live, It shouldn't all just be like kind of, yeah, man, just, you hear that? Little, oh yeah. I've watched some of those videos and I'm like, I didn't learn anything, except that if I had an Eve and I was boosting some 10K, it might sound better, So I know what you're saying. It's kind of like getting in there and, really trying to make this, getting the best out of everything. And 99% of it is, like we were talking about right at the beginning, it's ground up. It's like, get a great performance, capture it really well. If you have to edit it to make it better, that's what we have to do. We can't be wagging our fingers telling off our artists, because I'm friends with a lot of guys who made records in the 70s that we all consider to be the greatest records of all time. Jack Douglas is a family friend, Shelley Yakus, Jay Messina. These guys made half of the records that people are always telling me are the best sounding records. And if you sit with them and go, well, what was it like making Aerosmith Rocks? Jack will be like, oh my God, couldn't get that groove right. We had to cut the tape. We had to redo this. We fed them back out through speakers to bring in room sounds. He told me on a Cheap Trick live at the Budokan record that actually it wasn't the Budokan, it was Osaka. So when they found the video or the film of Budokan, they couldn't use the original recordings, but nobody really noticed. But now they have Pro Tools. They could go back to the original tapes, which were so badly recorded and distorted, blah, blah, blah. The point is like, it was never like a bunch of geniuses just happened to walk into a recording studio and somebody pressed record and they're like, oh my God, we just did Hey Jude. It was amazing. It just wasn't like that. It's always been work. Yeah. It's always been work. And sometimes it's a stereo mic and genius, and sometimes it's getting in there and multi-tracking and fixing it. And most of the time it's somewhere in between. So I would say take the experiences that you have and own them, and just think it's great that you get to work with artists that you have to do a lot of work with, because as you get better at your craft, you will generate more customers, the customer will get better, and you'll find that you're solving problems like really, really fast. I remember tracking Steven Tyler's vocals, and he would sing a line. First of all, he would self-comp, which is genius. You sing for an hour and a half on a song, when you finish it, you've also comped it. Because he would go, he'd sing a line, maybe 2 or 3 lines, and he would miss a word or wouldn't sing the second line quite the way he wanted it to. So he'd be like, can I go back and punch that in? The thing is, I've been doing this for 1,000 years, so I knew what he wanted me to do. I was already queued up. And so he would second word, and as he was saying it, we're rolling back to that thing and playing that part, and he just punched in. After doing that, he realized, Warren's really super intuitive. But I got to be super intuitive because of what you're talking about. I'm working with a lot of really bad singers. I wasn't just sitting there going, you're a genius, let's go on, Yeah. And I remember, I'll tell you one last story. I won't say who the guitar player was, but I did get to spend some time with Jeff Beck a few years ago. An amazing guy, and he had made a record with a really famous guitar player who had produced it. And I said to him, wow, how come it never came out? He's like, he was too much of a fan. Mm-hmm. So part of your job is to not just go, oh my God, it's amazing. It is, unfortunately, to suffer a little bit and get in there and work and go, I need to redo this. This needs to be done. And the only way to learn that is to work with people that aren't that good. So, and often some of the most successful artists that you get to work with aren't necessarily technically very gifted, but they have amazing ideas. And I'd much rather work with an artist with an incredible song and a great idea and a left-of-center way of doing something than working with anybody who's a technically amazing guitar player. Haven't you noticed that sort of trend on YouTube? There's so many videos of just like, it was the Mixolydian Phrygian 45971 EQ, blah, blah, blah. Who gives a rat's ass? If I have to watch another video of somebody telling me how they did this, when you ask the artist, and the artist is like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. There was, Noel Gallagher was interviewed recently and said, oh, I watched a video breakdown of how one of your songs is. He's like, I watched it, I had no idea what the guy was talking about. He's like, G, C, and D, I threw in an E minor, went to a B minor. You know what I mean? It's just, I get it. It makes people feel like they're really smart. They know how to. But at the end of the day, you just got to roll up your sleeves and get in there and learn. And it's good to have technical knowledge. Of course it is. But don't let it be a crutch. I think that you're in the right kind of career path, which is work with some crap and polish the schnizzle out of it. And the more you do this, the better your client base will be, the better you'll be at your job. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and unfortunately, watch some of the stuff we do. There's quite a lot of stuff we do that isn't that well recorded, but I know what you're saying. A lot of that stuff sometimes feels like fluff pieces, you know, based on look at me, aren't I amazing, you know.
All right. Thank you so much for that answer. I hope it helped. It was a great answer and so much to unpack there. So many nuggets in every one of these. So thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for coming here live.
Sorry, only 2 questions, so I talk too much.
No, I think you've answered like 10 questions with your 2 answers for those questions. So this is perfect.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. And thank you guys for coming here, for joining us live. There's more to come. There's more interviews that we do here with amazing people like Jason Joshua and like so many great people, and also many of our peers and Studioszene guys. It's going on all day. They do a lot of cool things here. So please come back, and thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Warren.
Real quick shout out. Warren's got a masterclass coming up.
Oh yeah.
So please
go
check that out. That's very important. Pick up his book, and can we please get a huge round of applause for Warren Huart. Thank you for coming, sir.
You all rock. Thank you very much. Marvelous. That was fun.
Very fun. Thank you, sir.